Welcome to HuffPost Live. I'm Mike Sachs. We are a week into sequestration, and already the pain from sharp budget cuts is being felt across the country. These cuts were touted as a necessary attack on mounting federal debt that was stifling private investment and economic output. But will they actually reboot the economy and create jobs? Well, joining me now is Jim Carr, distinguished scholar at the Opportunity Agenda. Jim, you authored this piece, it's on my computer here, titled Spending Cut. Now, GOP, where are the jobs? And you argue that the cuts could lead to increased unemployment and slower economic growth. Can you tell us why?
Right, sure. So, Mike, in the nature of what the cuts are, they are spending cuts to the federal government, and so they will result in cutbacks in program spending directly to individuals, as well as furloughs for federal employees. One of the things that's interesting about the furloughs is to the extent that individuals, for example, are furloughed losing 1 day a week of their work, they will have lower income, but they won't show up as unemployed. And so the impacts on the economy are going to be, at a minimum, there will be, not much of an impact. On the high end, there could be a pretty significant hit to the economy, because the economy is not suffering from a deficit problem. The economy is suffering from aggregate demand, meaning that people aren't spending and governments aren't spending, because both have been crushed by this foreclosure crisis, the financial crisis, and the downturn in the economy.
So then what is the solution here, other than getting our lawmakers to get back to the table and end the sequestration and make something work?
Well, amazingly, getting them back to the table to resolve some of the sequestration problems actually isn't fixing what's wrong with the economy. The economy is in need of a real jump start, and this is something that many people have written about, Nobel laureates such as Joseph Stiglitz and others, Paul Krugman, even President Obama. You'll remember when he was candidate Obama in '08, he was talking about the need to invest significantly in America's infrastructure, because we really need to repair our infrastructure, and we can leverage that infrastructure to create jobs of the future. Well, you fast forward to today, 2013, we still need a major investment plan. And the problem with dealing with the fiscal cliff and sequestration and continuing resolutions is none of that really looks at a broad-based investment plan for the future of America. Really, what is doing at best is keeping us from running into some legal problems, such as a debt ceiling, impediment or something of that nature. But it's not about investing in jobs. It's certainly not about promoting economic growth.
Yeah, and you wrote in your article here, pulling back on federal spending now is equivalent to an unemployed worker refusing to go on job interviews in order to save on gas or bus fare.
Right, it certainly is, because there are three ways to deal with the deficit. Historically, we've dealt with all three. One is to cut back on spending, one is to raise taxes, and the third is to grow the economy. We're not doing a good job on the tax side, and we're doing absolutely nothing on grow the economy. And as I said, it's not as if people don't know what to do. They do know. We really need to find ways to invest in sectors of the economy that will promote job creation and that will bring private companies to the table and have them invest. Instead, what we have is major corporations sitting on the sidelines with over $2 trillion of cash, and they're not investing. It's not the deficit that they're not investing. The reason they're not investing because they don't see the demand for consumers to actually put the money into, new products and services and inventory.
Okay, so new products, services, and inventory. Explain how a private corporation can invest in these things, and what areas are you talking about?
Sure. So, for example, America has no high-speed rail. The Japanese economy had high-speed rails going all the way back to the 1960s. We need to invest in things like high-speed rail. The new magnetic levitation trains. If you were to put down new high-speed rail, think about it. All of that laying of the new infrastructure for those rails would be new. Those would be new jobs, and they would range from everything from the design and the construction of the engines to the cars to the tracks themselves, right? Everywhere those trains stops would represent new stations, right? Stations to enter and exit the trains, and that would represent an opportunity for more stores, more convenient locations, selling them all sort of manner of products. And so we need things that actually promote the economy. There are also things that are pretty straightforward and simple. We know that our bridges and roads are crumbling across America. We've seen some fantastic disasters over the last several years where, major bridges have literally collapsed. And so just investing in improving those bridges and roads creates jobs for a lot of unemployed construction workers. So there are many, many things that can be done to promote the economy.
Well, Jim, I want to bring in our HuffPost Live community. I don't know if you've done this before, but they're eager to talk to you. We have Egberto Willies from Kingswood, Texas, and Matt Sky from New York, New York. So, Matt, you've been sitting listening to Jim talk. It seems like everything he's saying is eminently reasonable. Why are we having to even listen to what he has to say when we have the sequester? We have a fix, right? Jim doesn't need to be sitting here telling us all that's wrong. We know what's wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's just Washington gridlock right now. I mean, people don't want to come to an agreement. Nobody wants to award anyone points. So it's purely a self-created problem. And what we need to see are people come together from both parties and just demand more government-created jobs, more infrastructure projects. It is, like he said, such a no-brainer. I mean, you create better subways, better roads, you're going to create a better economy. And not just for those initial jobs, but the jobs that help support the people who are now suddenly working again.
Right, Jim, it must be maddening that you're here saying things that are perfectly obvious, right? And outside of that office, you're sitting in Washington, D.C., people are just gridlocked about it.
Right. Well, it really is maddening, especially when you're here in Washington, because you understand the details. So you would have thought that after all of that hand-wringing and all of the drama leading up to the sequestration, which wasn't avoided, after everyone said it wouldn't happen, but it actually happened, you would think that that would be the end of the budget disaster. But then you turn around and all of a sudden we're now back to the fiscal cliff. And this is fiscal cliff part 2, by the way, because we already dealt with the fiscal cliff at the early part of the year. It was kicked down the can was kicked down the road for 2 months to March 27th. So now we have another budget crisis that lawmakers are wrestling with. And after this comes the debt ceiling. And so it's almost like a never-ending saga of silliness on the budget. And none of the conversations are focused in on why is the economy so soft? Why is it struggling? And what can we do at a national level to promote job creation? There's none of that happening at all.
And Egberto, what's your view from Texas?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I think the narrative has to change. And the reality is we need to start, it took Occupy Wall Street to change the narrative from the debt back a couple of years ago. It's going to take another thing again to do that, because we should not be concentrating on the debt that is as it is right now. One of the reasons they want to do that is because, in as much as we hate unemployment, corporate America loves unemployment because what it does is it keeps wages down. So this isn't anything new. Back in 1937, during the Depression, we all knew that we needed stimulative spending to actually move the country forward. But what did we do? Back in 1937, we had that dip again because we had this false need to fix a budget that would have fixed itself once we emerged from the recession. What happened after 37? We had World War II, which was the biggest massive stimulus ever.
Well, I hope that we don't need another New Deal or, God forbid, another World War to get our economy back on track, because frankly, right, we don't. There's a much more modest fix.
We can make infrastructure our war. If we decided to make infrastructure our war, we could invest in infrastructure like we would have invested in tanks and bombs and so forth, just like the professor said back there, and then we would actually get the economy moving. But that's not what our people are, not what the titans of finance want, because that then creates a group of people who can actually demand wages.
So just a couple of points on that. I think that the gentleman is absolutely right. Of course, we don't want a war to stimulate the economy, but if you go back to the Great Depression, you look at things like the Federal Housing Administration, Federal Home Loan Banks, Fannie Mae, all those institutions were put into place to drive jobs. They were all housing institutions, but it was recognized that housing could create jobs. So it's the same concept as infrastructure today. After World War II, we had a whole host of Veterans Administration programs to help integrate returning veterans into the labor market, creating jobs. And we also had the Federal Highway Administration that built our interstate highway system, again, creating millions of jobs. And one of the things I want to point out about the sort of the stimulus, because that's also important to recognize. A lot of Americans are really upset about the fact that the banks were bailed out in 2008, but the American public wasn't. But what many people don't recognize is that banks are still being bailed out today. And so, for example, when you look at the fact that the largest financial corporations in America have access to 0% interest financing,
Exactly.
that's one of the reasons why many large corporations are doing so well in an economy that during the last quarter of 2012 grew by only 0.1%. And it is so striking that former FDIC chair Sheila Bair actually threw a proposal out. Of course, it was, it was tongue in cheek and as a kind of a joke, but she said, why not give every American household $10 million? That could allow them to earn $200,000 a year at a very low 2% interest rate on a 10-year treasury, which is what the rate was at that time. And so when you look at it like that, we have an economy that actually, it's not just the economy, it's that we have federal infrastructure that's actually supporting the largest corporations and by extension, those executives, that 1%, which is one of the reasons why in the middle of this economic crisis, we're also seeing a huge growth in economic inequality.
Yeesh. Well, Jim,
it's interesting that you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to have to wrap this up, but Jim, I want to thank you very much for joining us. And community, please do stick with us. Up next on HuffPost Live, we have news from the Vatican.